now also. And you invited some of your friends as panelists. So before I hand over to you, before we hand over to you, Marco, maybe Gordon, you give the audience a quick review. I think you're still in LA, right? We don't need to repeat that.
Yeah, well, I'll just say, when I'm not in Los Angeles and I'm broadcasting from a place closer to you, I'll be dancing. You can tell because I'll be dancing. But yes, at the moment I'm in Studio City, California, home of the undecided election. And just real quick, yes, I'm a lawyer who specializes in cryptocurrency and blockchain. Sandra and I started this up several months ago. Marco's been fantastic. I'm working with him on a few projects, actually. Very sharp mind, very good guy. And his involvement with Crypto Wednesdays, both as someone who kind of shows up and asks good questions and is provocative as a general alumni speaker, is vast and appreciated. And I know that I'm not going to steal his thunder. I know the topic that he assembled this panel for is something very close and dear to his heart, something he's been working on a lot. My intention, like I mentioned in the pre-show, is kind of step back during this, but it's such an interesting topic. I may break in. We'll see. Sandra, do you want to give the quick words about question, Zoom bombing, and all that other good stuff?
Yeah, maybe for the new people. So for example, last week we had a few strange guests, let's put it like that, some Zoom bombers. So if there are any Zoom bombers here or coming in, we get them out. We give them a big laugh, and wish them a good life. But in the meantime, the first part of the show, for everybody that's attending the live show, if you have any questions or comments or whatsoever, please put it in the chat box. For the first part, we will close also the videos for the non-speakers. And the second part of the show, we open up the mics. You can get into the conversation. You can ask Marco or his friends some questions or some remarks. So maybe before we really go to Marco, Gordon, maybe it's good that you intro Marco because you brought him to the table. 4 months ago.
Well, just I think I kind of did. But I'll put it this way: I vouch for him in the mafia sense. But let's just start up. Let's just start up and hand it to Marco. Marco, introduce yourself and your co-panelists and just go for it.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes. Well.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me to your, actually, I find it an awesome way to spend my Wednesday mornings. There's always provocative people. There's always topics that are interesting, and much to my enjoyment, I love the idea that there's nothing too focused about the discussions, because we tend to diverge a lot of times, and we diverge into very interesting topics. So I've been working on decentralized, self-sovereign digital identity, which I said backwards, self-sovereign, decentralized digital identity, SSDDID, for a couple of years now, mostly in the conceptual phase, trying to find a model that would actually work. And I'm going to present that, excuse me, I'm going to present just a very high-level conceptual framework that I think has what it takes to make this work globally. And, excuse me again, 1 second. Don't even start, Gordon.
While you're recovering along, I want to give a shout out to Sergey and Elizabeth. They're alumni speakers joining us from Moscow, I believe. And Sergey has a great show on Monday called Think Tank that he's nice enough to invite me on occasion. Schedules don't always allow, but he specifically made a point of joining in on this because it's a topic that's near and dear to his heart. So Sergey, obviously, during the alumni speaker portion, there'll be more active back and forth, but I'm giving you a wave while Marco recovers.
Okay, Sergey, I'm good. I'm good. But thank you, Sergey. I'm looking forward to it. Definitely. In fact, that's my idea theoretically here behind this whole this discussion is to have as many people as possible, starting with Luke, who's had many discussions with me on this topic, and Alex, who I met through the D4A conference, who is also deeply involved. This is not a technical discussion. We're gonna make a lot of assumptions about what tech exists, and we're gonna look at this from how does this work socially, economically, compliance, legally, all that fun stuff, and get right into that. And with that, anybody who wants to find out who I am and what I'm about, you can go look at my LinkedIn profile. It's just LinkedIn/IN/Annabally. And that's spelled out for you right there in the participants list. So go right ahead and have a look there if you want to know more about me. I'm, as I said, Gordon mentioned, involved in several projects, a couple of DAOs to begin with, and also I run a blockchain software development company where we work mostly on core blockchain rather than on smart contracts and things. And with that, I'm going to let Luke and Alex introduce themselves. Luke, why don't you take the first one?
Sure. My name is Luke Stokes. I'm the managing director for the Foundation for Interwallet Operability. We're trying to make cryptocurrency easier to use, and part of that component is a human readable identifier. So like Luke at Stokes is a handle that you can have on the FIO protocol. So it kind of connects into identity, and Marco's been doing some really cool stuff. He was kind enough to ask me to participate. I guess I'm just really loud and opinionated, so I find myself in being asked to participate. Would not at all consider myself an expert in identity because I haven't really done anything officially in the space like my other esteemed colleagues. However, I do like to think about these from an ethical, philosophical, moral perspective and how it can impact the world. And, you know, I do think it's going to be built. And so we got to figure out how to do it right. So thank you, Marco, for having me. I really appreciate being here.
Awesome. And Alex.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Alex. I'm based in Barcelona, and I'm involved in self-sovereign and SSI for the last 3 years, I would say. Like I started funding, I'm the founder of an association in Spain that's called Alastria. It was quite successful at the time. We had around 500 companies joining in to build some kind of public infrastructure for self-sovereign identity in Spain. So there are a lot of movements here, and even politicians, they talk about that. But then all of the big companies came in, and it became some kind of digital lobby at the point. Anyway, I'm building, I'm coding, so that's what I do. I code standards, and I code basically a solution for processes in top of SSI. So basically, nobody wants blockchain. That's something I learned. Nobody buys digital identity also, so it's quite hard to sell. So basically, we're selling some kind of RBA. And if it has like blockchain in the back and SSI, nobody cares.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Okay, so I'm just going to kick this off. Alex and Luke have already seen this, and I'm just going to play around with my Zoom interface here and share a little, very short slide deck. So just for clarification for everybody, I'm assuming everyone can see it because I can see it on my second screen.
You're good, it's visible.
Self-sovereign, yeah, self-sovereign. Let's make sure we all understand self-sovereign means that you are in control of you. Okay, that's the key point about self-sovereign anything, is that you are in control of everything that is related to you. Decentralized and digital, everyone understands what digital is, and decentralized, for the purposes of this conversation, because it's a very contentious word these days about what is the definition of decentralized, it means that there is no center. Okay, so there is no center of this infrastructure that we're talking about implementing here. This is a thing that has, the center is you. You are the center of this thing, and your neighbor across the street is the center of theirs, and Alex is the center of his, and Gordon is the center of his. And the only center is the self. And then, of course, identity. So we're presenting a conceptual model here, very, very high level, with the assumption that the technology exists, we just haven't assembled it correctly yet. And we're going to talk about, from this model, ideally, what are the problems, and are there situations where it completely falls flat in its face, in which case we're going to throw this out the window and start talking about other things. So the model is basically designed to, I'm just waiting for the rest of the screens to catch up. There we go. There are two components. There's a core and there's the edges. In the core, you have what everybody fears. You are assigned a number. In this case, the number is what you probably commonly have seen if you play around with blockchains very much. You've seen an address. And it's a very long string of gobbledygook that you don't really know what it means, but it's in fact a unique identifier for you. The core's design is that everything is secret. When you are connected to the core, you're the only person who can see your stuff, and you can't see anybody else's stuff. All you can see is yours. But the infrastructure is a single infrastructure that is decentralized. In other words, copies of it are stored all over the planet. So it's always redundant. You can never lose the data, but the only thing you can see in it is your record. And that acts as what the W3C has decided to call a DID, a digital identity. But all it says about you is that you are unique, and that's it. You are unique, and this is your system's name, if you will. You never share it with anybody. You never tell anybody what it is. You keep it secret for your entire life. There's no need to share it. No one should ever know what it is. And then we get into the next stage. This is what goes on outside the core. And outside the core, all of these circles, with the exception of the middle one, think of them as blockchain applications. Right? Each one's a separate one. And each one sets up a relationship between your DID, your secret number, and somebody else's secret number. And when it does that, it creates a new secret number that is unique to just the relationship between you two. And you can have thousands of these things. And in fact, if you think about how you live your life, you already do have thousands of relationships. You just don't think of them that way. What we're talking about here with respect to digital identity, if you look at it from what your perspective would look like, it would look like this, except a lot wider. Each blue box there is a relationship. The red box underneath it represents the unique identifier that uniquely identifies the fact that you and someone else have a relationship. And it is not decodable. No one can figure out who the two parties are, but it is there. And it's always the same. So if you, say, join Facebook, you'll get this unique relationship ID. And then if you quit Facebook and come back 5 years later, you will still have the same relationship ID, and Facebook will know that you're the same person that quit 5 years ago.
Sorry, Marco, can I ask you a question?
Sure, please.
You're describing the world as it is now, or as it is under a platform you're proposing, or just orient me a little bit?
A framework I'm proposing.
Okay, so
because this is not the way the world is now. Facebook doesn't know if you show up and sign up another account that it's the same you from 5 weeks ago.
Okay, got it. So this is because there's some aspects of this that seem to map to present reality, but you're presenting in a sort of more structured, high level view. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. That's the goal here. So you can see you've got, for example, your Amazon relationship, you would have a pseudonym. There's no need to give them your real name. They have no use for it, and no actual legal requirement to have it per se. And they need to know your age.
Sorry, on the prior slide where you had the core, can you go back one slide?
I just did.
There's a slight delay.
Lag.
So digital identity. Okay, now again, this is proposed, or this is sort of mapping the way things are now?
Well, funny enough, this is the way things are now. If you take digital ID out there and put in your full name, address, phone number, and passport photo and utility bill for the DID.
Got it. And then what does the core represent?
The core represents the repository of all digital identities, which are keys. Right? Okay. And this is just pulling out an example.
Got it.
From it.
Okay, thank you. We're good.
So I was just saying, you're on to the next slide here. We're talking about what it would look like to you. In your world of looking at your digital identity, you would see a whole bunch of relationships that you have. And each of those relationships would have a unique identifier. that only you and the person you have the relationship with know. And then within that unique identifier, if you have access to that relationship ID, you would be able to see all the stuff you've disclosed or done with that particular person or company, whatever the case may be. And those become things that represent part of who you are. So you have your DMV in there where you get your name, your date of birth, your residence, your testing status for your driver's license, so whether the license is suspended or not, and what's the expiry date. All that data is tied to that relationship between you and the DMV. But only you and the DMV can see it. But you are free to share it with other people if they say, I want to know that you have a driver's license. You can now formally claim, yes, I do. And here's the relationship ID that proves it in one scenario. In a scenario where the whole platform is reasonably trusted by the rest of the world, they wouldn't even need to know the relationship ID. They would just need to know that the platform says, yes, you have a driver's license, and here's the jurisdiction it's in. And we can get into a whole ton of detail on this, but I'm trying not to because it can get pretty crazy. I'm going to actually pop a copy of this into the over to you, Gordon, and you can share it out to the channel, so everyone can have a copy and ask questions, I suppose, if they want. And I'll do that right after I finish this last slide. And the title says it all. Identity is the collection of all of this. Currently, when we think of identity, we think of our driver's license, our birth certificate, our passport. That's our identity, right? Those are just relationships we have, right? Our birth certificate is our relationship with the government at the date we were born. And our passport is our relationship with our chosen government or governments, if you have more than one passport, that state that this is your relationship with the government at the time it was issued. And your driver's license is the same thing. It's a relationship with wherever it is you are legally allowed to drive at the time you passed your test until blank years later when you have to get it renewed. And that's all it does, right? What I'm proposing here, and what a lot of people in the world are coming to, is that your identity actually should be tied to all the things you do that are identifiable things that have meaning in the world. And that includes things like, who are your friends? Who's your family? Who are your employers? What governments are you registered with, and for what reasons? Are you taxable here? Are you a citizen of here but you don't live there? Can you drive in multiple countries? Do you have Amazon accounts in multiple countries? All of that stuff collectively, the whole collection of it, is your identity. And it brings into play the concept that your identity cannot be taken away from you in a self-sovereign situation. The US government can pull away your passport and say, no, you're stateless. And in most people's case, that makes you unidentifiable. In a world where identity is the collection of all the things you've done and all the things you can do and do, you're removing the passport from your identity does not delete your identity. It just deletes one component of it. And that component is only inactive. You're still recognized, that the US government recognized you for being who you are. They just decided to stop recognizing you for some reason or other. It doesn't change the fact that you were recognized by any number of border control stations as you pass through with your with your passport. It doesn't mean that you don't have a bank account. It doesn't mean you can't get another bank account, because a bank will just look at it and go, well, regardless of your whole passport thing, we know you're a great customer at these 4 banks. And so why shouldn't we be a service provider to you too? And I know we're getting into some real fun legal stuff there, Gordon, but I sort of wanted to just wrap this whole thing up. Your identity is the collection of everything that you have a relationship with in the world, not just a government.
Okay, interesting. You know what? James Haft, who is on this call now, made a comment to me yesterday, which I thought was kind of funny. He said, well, do you remember the first thing you learned in property class in law school? And we actually were thinking of 2 separate things. My answer was that property rights are really, or property is really just a bundle of rights that you can, like a bunch of twigs like tied together, or fasces, or you can take any one of them out and assign it, like the right to license or the right to possess or the right to use whatever, and it's a bundle of rights. You're making an interesting analogy in my mind between that and identity sort of being a bundle of relationships. So it's an interesting insight to say your driver's license or your birth certificate is a relationship to your government at the time you're born. That's an interesting way of putting it. So kudos to you.
It's unfortunate.
I want to welcome James Haft. Good to see you. And welcome Sophia. Sophia is pretty much in charge of the Malta Summit. Welcome, Sophia. She's here somewhere. And I'm going to hand it back to you. Keep going.
Wait, can I stick in? Right. Gordon? Can I stick in what I said, which was?
Yes, please. I was putting words in your mouth. Please go ahead.
Exactly, but the core concept of property law is that I can't take from you what you don't have to give, and that fits in with Marco was saying also, in that how you create that mosaic of what identifies you, is essential in what people can take from you later.
Beautiful. Okay. Yeah. All right.
And if it's self-sovereign, they can't take it. They can only ask you to release it.
Right.
All right, so let's open this up to your panel, because I want to.
Yeah, please.
I love the cross dialogue and I love the fighting. So just Luke and Alex, Marco, lead them away.
All right. I'm sure both of you have things to say. Shall we start with Alex this time?
Alex, you got to take yourself
You're muted, Alex.
Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes. Okay, unmute yourself and stay unmuted unless there's a dog in the background.
No, I have a dog in the background. Yeah, I do have. I don't have a cat, sorry. But I think it's quite complicated. Like when I started thinking about self-sovereign identity, then the question was like, what's identity? And it should be quite an easy question. And then I started like learning about it and reading, and I think nobody knows. And so basically, as most of the community that's working on SSI, like me, we are working on something that nobody knows where it is, as usually. So probably most of us are quite lost when it comes to self-sovereign identity or what it means. Even there's people that they say that self-sovereign identity is too dangerous because like you can lose your identity and then you can lose everything. So yes, I do believe, first of all, like identity should be controlled by people, not by organizations. I think that's a problem with internet. Internet was born like a way to share pictures of cats, but not with a real identity. So right now, everybody's digitalizing. Everybody's like getting into the into the digital world. Most of the companies, they are. And every time a new company, a new service comes into place, we get a new identity. I think usually we have around 70 identities, like each one of us. The main thing is like that we have literally 70, 80, maybe 90, a lot of identities, but we have control over none of those identities. So basically, we need to change the internet. We need to decentralize it, but before decentralizing everything, we need a better identity system. I think SSI could be one of the solutions, and basically it means reaching standards amongst all of the people that's building things. So the model that you presented, Marco, I think it's great. It looks like a lot like what we're trying to build. Every one of us, by the way, a lot of people is trying to build that. But if we don't just work together with that and like what you're doing right now, sharing the model, discussing the model, and then building together the model and the standards, like this is going to be quite complicated. And we're finding a big market. There are a lot of, if you go into the digital identity world, I think that the market is $5 or $7 billion, something like that. It's huge market. And none of them want to lose control over the market. Probably you ask Google if they want to lose all of their users. Maybe they say that they are not interested. I'm not sure about that.
Alex, you said something interesting during your original introduction, which is I think I heard you say you program standards. Did you say that?
Yeah, I think
Does that relate
standards.
to digital identity? What the standards you're programming, and what does that mean?
It means that SSI. It should, there's like a lot of different characteristics for SSI, but a few of them are that should be interoperable and portable. Meaning that no matter what agent or service I use to store my identity, even if I do it myself, I could move my whole identity from my wallet to another wallet. So we should work with the same standards. If not, probably we'll end up building a lot of different services for identity that they are not connected to each other, and it does not make any sense at all.
And
so
are these standards like ISO standards? Are they
well,
standards they're widely
the
accepted?
standards,
Like, what makes them a standard? The ones
I think standard is that everybody uses it.
Everybody
like
uses it. That was the standard.
I don't know.
Standard to me implies some kind of third-party certification service, or like ISO or something, or International Electronics, whatever it is.
Well, W3C,
body.
it's doing that. Yeah, but W3C right now is working on the standards. There are two big standards for SSI. That's the DIDs, Decentralized Identifiers, and verifiable credentials. So both are standards. And I think it's quite important also to there's a lot of work done in the area, like schema. If you go to schema.org, you will see all of the work that's been done on semantic web that we could use, by the way. So the semantic web is a good example of a standard that we could use. But W3C is doing a big effort. There's an event that's called Rebooting the Web of Trust. There are a few of them, but Rebooting the Web of Trust, that's led by Christopher Allen. That basically they're working on that. They are trying to build the standard. The main problem is that there's a lot of people building the standards for everything, and then there's a few people coding. And usually when you code, you find different problems that when you do a standard. When you do a standard, you think about like globally and all of the problems in the world, but then you code and you see that probably the problems are completely different.
Right, and the thing you bring up, Alex, is one of the key things I'm trying to fight against, is that there are bodies out there trying to set standards that invariably are digitizing what already exists. And that is the real problem, and the thing that we're trying to solve, both my internal team and the team at large, if you will, everyone who participates in all the different projects I'm in, is the idea that you're setting, what we want to do is that core piece that I was mentioning before. We want to set a standard for that. But all that is your keys, literally the keys, or the key ring, if you will, that gets you into all the other types of things. And the concept is not a web of trust. The concept is a web of accountability.
How do you distinguish that?
Yep.
Web of trust implies it's basically a faith-based model, right? Trust is not a guarantee. You cannot trust somebody 100%, ever. Trust is a choice. And you choose to trust somebody. Most people who've lived long enough in this world trust, but verify. and even after they've verified, they trust, but they have a contingency in case their trust is breached. Web of accountability, the concept is that it doesn't matter whether I trust you or not. I know you're accountable.
Okay.
Right? And that's the key. I mean, right now.
What does that mean then? Like when you say accountable, generally people think about like if you look at these different rules for how you do governance, there's like some feature that's going to happen to them. There's some, thing they have to, some risk that they're taking, some kind of, consequence. There's always a different way to say we're enforcing something through that accountability. Otherwise, it's just the same kind of like trust thing, right? Well,
yeah, the lovely thing about immutable databases like blockchains is that you can't hide from your past. And if you set up a relationship using this model, because you can't fake who you are in the relationship and the other person can't fake who they are in the relationship, when the relationship is formed, you have the option of adding transactional information to that relationship over time, things like for a driver's license, you renewed it again, you renewed it again, you lost it, you got a new one, all that kind of stuff. But it is fully, you're fully accountable. Both parties are fully accountable to that relationship. So if you go and do something within that relationship context that causes havoc, mayhem, or just sadness, whatever, right? Oh, he took $10 from me. That $10 he took from you is on record. You can't walk away from it. And people asking you down the road, I want to see your overall trust rating, which would be calculated by you, by the way, but you wouldn't have any control over it other than how you act. But when someone says, I need you to disclose your overall trust rating, or your overall, what's the word? Accountability rating, right? When you say you're going to do something, do you do it? Kind of rating that you could build out of that huge web of relationships, but it would be built in software on your self-sovereign control point.
But it can be dangerous. Like, we don't have a really secure internet right now, so identity can be stolen. Somebody can steal my identity, do things with my identity that will never be erased, will never be deleted.
Right. It would be akin to them stealing your Bitcoin wallet off of your phone.
Yeah.
Not easy.
Not easy, but it can be done. Possible, by the way.
It can be done. In fact, they can't steal it. They can copy it and start acting as you. It wouldn't take you very long to figure out that had happened.
Probably, but they can
to
do
your point though, on that model, if they were to do that, like, it breaks every other relationship you've ever had, unless they're able to only get access to like one relational ID, right? And kind of a follow-up question is, I'm like, how does this fit in with the DID standard that the Web3 and others are working on? You know, I mean, we talked a little bit about standards, but we kind of didn't finish that conversation. One of my favorite XKCDs is the one where it's like, why are there 12 standards? You know, we need a single standard to unify all the standards. And of course, the last frame is there are now 13 standards. And this is the classic case of anyone who's in software, you know, for a decade or two. It's one of my favorite XKCDs because it's like, it outlines exactly the situation we're in. You got the DID, you've got, you know, there was a Microsoft OpenID, I mean, or, you know, Google authentication. I mean, there's so many examples of people trying to solve this. And partly, I feel like it's just, you know, like the Facebook model of, you know, shipped code wins. Whoever actually deploys a working system that government,
that's beautiful, by the way,
individuals trust, then I think that one's
shipped code wins. Yeah, no, I agree with you. Shipped code wins. And to be honest with you, I don't think you could ever package this model I'm presenting here. You cannot package it and ship it. It will fail. It will fail because too many people will see. They will fail because it removes Facebook's ability to cross-match its users. It eliminates it. It removes Google's ability to cross-match users with other databases. It removes government's ability and the NSA's ability and everything else to cross-match users. And the minute you remove all of that, you've fundamentally shifted the economy of the internet. Because currently the economy of the internet is all based on grabbing as much information about the users of the internet as possible, segmenting and advertising, and driving, you know, new markets and all those kinds of things based on this data you're able to gather, because there's 2 billion people exposing their personal information on Facebook in detail. And then there's half of those are also exposing it on Google in different forms. And then they're doing stupid things like maybe they're adding their social insurance number to their profile somewhere, and all of a sudden, boom, you can tie that in, and oh, it's over the moon. This thing has to be deployed in a way that it becomes because one of the key things that I didn't talk about here, but from an economic perspective, that core infrastructure that just keeps your digital ID, and the digital ID in this case is the root of the W3C spec. It's that ID number, and that's it. The rest of the stuff that the W3C wants to see is coming from relationships. It's relationship with the government that gives you a passport. That gives you a whole bunch of those other W3C items now available to you to share once you've gotten that government's agreement that yes, you exist and you are who you say you are, or a KYC verifier, or a bank, or whatever, right? And those are the things that add the attributes that we all care about. But as I was saying in the model, you get way more attributes than just those standard sets, because you have other things you do that actually help identify you. But that core piece, you literally have to ship it quietly in secret, kind of like what Bitcoin did, sort of, and just get it being used by any identity app out there, because anybody can build one of those circles on the outside of the ring and just integrate so that they use their ID on the core as their key for accessing all their particular service offerings. So replacing OAuth, for example, or not replacing it, but just putting up a competitor, DAuth, right? And that just works, except this one, when someone says, I want to sign up with you with my DAuth, you get a little pop-up on your screen that says, they want you to disclose this information. Are you okay with that? Knowing that it will only be disclosed to them, and they can't share it, that's illegal.
So
and then you move down the path.
To pull this off, it sounds like we have to educate people on the intricacies of public-private key encryption and let them know, like, hey, even your quote-unquote public ID, this ID that's generated uniquely for you is not public. It's completely secret and private. You should never expose it. But the concern I have there, well,
at Mr. FIO, the user will never see it. The user will never see it.
The interesting thing about it is, like, we have to, I might have been in this space for 7.5 years, and the conclusion I've come to is that crypto is too hard and public-private key encryption is too difficult. PGP has been around forever, and most people, everyday people, don't use it because it's just too complicated to manage these private keys in an effective way. And so I kind of was like, well, let's make it easier. And we have this trend with PayPal onboarding Bitcoin, and this idea that people are going to be sending and receiving value with a username or an email address or a phone number on WhatsApp or WeChat. Like, this is where the world is moving, whether we like it or not. And my approach is, well, I'd rather they move towards decentralized identity systems, decentralized currencies, decentralized stores of value. And so what we're working on with Theo is this kind of human readable Luke at Stokes. Very simple, and that, because that's what people want. And so
exactly,
technologists and innovators were like pushing what's best for you. Here's the technology that's going to serve you best. Here's what you should adopt and implement. And the market just chuckles and moves along, right? So I'm wondering, how do we tie in this human readable aspect of making the public-private key partition simpler? These interactions, like, because when I log in and do an OAuth as an example, I use my email. I don't use my actual OAuth code that's generated for me dynamically with that relationship, right? I use something.
The simplest way to start is with a QR code, right? You want to do an OAuth login with a DAuth thing. It would just, you'd click the DAuth button. I'll become a barcode. You'd pick up your authentication device.
Wait, guys, I'm sorry.
And you scan it.
Remember, I'm just a lawyer. OAuth, DAuth. I mean, I've seen.
Okay, OAuth is every time you see a button that says log in with Facebook, log in with Google, log in with Microsoft, you're effectively using the OAuth, which stands for Open Authentication. And you're using Facebook's credential management system to log into other services in exchange for Facebook and that other service being able to track the fact that you've done that and know something about you from your Facebook profile or your Google profile or your Microsoft profile.
Okay, and I think I've seen different versions of that standard. I think I've seen a version 1 and version 2. Is that
right? That's true.
It's evolved over time, and I worked at implementing it in certain systems. So, but it's like every single time there's that pop-up saying, "Do you want to log in?" And you notice you're in this little window, and it's like it starts to look like Facebook, and it's like, "Do you want to give Facebook this information?" And you're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, well." I don't really want to, but I want access to the service you're about to provide me. So you hit the button and you sell your soul to the centralized, devil, and you get access. But it is an interesting process where there's this centralized component of we are the server that can vouch that you're a real person. And that if you trust Facebook and my account with Facebook, then you trust that relationship that now I've created directly with you via Facebook. I mean, literally the codes go back and forth, but ultimately it's my Facebook login, that's my email that I connect to when I'm interacting with that. And QR codes are interesting, but they're not encrypted. I mean, there's attack potential there and stuff like that, right? So
you can put anything into a QR code. I'm sure you know that.
Yeah.
Including an encrypted message that is meant just for you and only your device could decrypt.
But Marco, I don't think the problem is technical. You can solve it with QR codes.
No, I agree. It's not technical. It's implementation and shipping it. How do you ship it without telegraphing to the planet that when this thing gets used by a lot of different apps and a lot of different infrastructures, that it will become a unified de facto, not de jure, infrastructure for identity that is decentralized, is owned by no one, has no token attached to it, is literally designed not to be owned, except collectively by all individuals.
Yeah, but no, once again, like, how do you convince people? Because most of the people I talk to, they don't care.
You don't convince people. You implement a solution for people. Let me get through this. You implement a solution for people that they do need. Think Civic, think Comply Advantage. All of these types of companies that currently are providing KYC AML checking so that people can get into brokerage accounts, bank accounts.
Most of the people, they don't know they need it. They really.
Well, they do. They go. Oh my God! I want to get into Revolut. I want to get into Revolut. I want a Revolut account because all my friends have Revolut accounts, and I've got to have one too. And what does Revolut do? They outsource their KYC AML to a service provider who does it all online, really cool. Just scan your face, scan your passport, type in some information, send, and sometime in the next 10 minutes to 3 days, you'll get a verified, and off you go. What if on the back end, instead of using some centralized KYC provider, you took that KYC provider and said, you know what, instead of doing it that way, do it this way. It's better long-term for the world, but you're only talking to the techies here. You're not talking to your customer. And as these registrations go on, which they're going to go on, you can't stop them. We're in a very compliance-oriented world these days. These registrations go on, build up the core.
That sounds like a centralized system built on top of a decentralized system. Like, because then your identity will be
except it isn't centralized.
And you have no control on that identity. Basically, you need to have control on that identity. And most of the people,
well, no, you still have control. Revolut still has control because they've set up a relationship with this unique identifier of you, right? They have control over that. They're capable of now sharing that with other parties in the same business model they already had. The idea, though, is that what you're now doing is you're building up this decentralized infrastructure for the core by adding people to it as they go through with their day-to-day normal stuff, right? Where they're getting online verified by whoever. And you're building it up. And other apps can now come on. Again, not me. I don't want to do this. I want anybody else out there to use this core as just the way they go through doing their back-end check. Because if Revolut has put you onto this system because you went through a Revolut KYC process, and you now have a relationship with Revolut, logged into basically linked on the system, and you also have a relationship with Revolut's KYC provider because that also got added in. And then one day someone brings out an app and says, here's a digital ID. It could be FIO for all we know. FIO could come up with their own wallet and say, you know what? We've got this great new identity thing. We're going to KYC you once if you aren't already KYC'd by this back end that we already have. I'm not going to tell you all about that. That's very secret, secure stuff. But we have a back end that knows a lot of people already who have been verified. And if you're not on that list, then fine, we can add you. And they bring out a wallet that says, okay, now we're going to let you attach all of your crypto accounts to your ID. And we're going to allow you to create a whole bunch of pseudonyms for your crypto accounts using the FIO protocol. You're still accountably verified. They've done the KYC thing. And technically, within FIO's community, they can link all of those pseudonyms to a unique identity. But you've now built out a whole crypto infrastructure where if someone wants to send from one person to another, they no longer have to worry about addresses. They can now use names, pseudonyms, but names. Much easier for people to get involved in.
In addition, depending on how you structured it, even that connection to the FIO protocol and how you do that could be just another relationship. Meaning I've got a relationship with FIO, I've got a relationship with Unstoppable Domains, I've got a relationship with, ENS or whatever.
Finance.
So one of the concerns I have with some of these things is for this, the core idea to this, to me, is unique ability of an individual human consciousness. Like that's the core concept. That is the core idea, that as soon as I can kind of connect with different other relational identity type solutions, I get to duplicate myself to some degree. And this becomes the one standard to rule them all. It almost has to be that, because I can have my, we haven't even given this a name, let's call it the SSDID, I guess. So the SSDID, I've got my ID there. Well, let's say I also go get my ID with someone else, and I get my ID with someone else, and I get my ID with someone else, and now I'm 5 people in a sense, right?
Well, effectively, you become 1,000 people.
Identity. But then you need to have control on your identity. That means having a wallet. That means educating people. And I think it's quite important to educate, but there's a long road there. Most of the people I talk to, they don't care about privacy. They say, no, I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't care about privacy. They're really wrong about that. But we need to educate on identity and privacy and tell them you need to protect yourself. You need to change your mind when it comes to the way you relate on internet. And that's a long journey. That's what I was saying.
Well, that's a journey. No argument. You're not going to get people to jump. Well, you'll get a lot of people to jump on just for the privacy function, but a lot of people, as you say, they don't care. That's just life. They do care when they're told they're being surveilled. That's a whole different story. Surveillance scares people, upsets them, right?
I think it goes both ways as well, though. And I've taken a controversial stance in this space in that I'm always Luke Stokes everywhere. I'm very public about it. And some people say, oh my gosh, well, how can you do that? You should not be public and be in the blockchain space. And my response is, you Google my name, I get to control the output for the last 10 plus years because I've been blogging on a blockchain on Hive, previously Steam. It's immutable, my thoughts at that moment. And no one else can control a narrative about who Luke Stokes is other than me, because I've been blogging on a platform where I control the content for over 4 years now. So I feel like there's two sides to this identity and privacy coin, in that I want to be able to be publicly controlling in a way that connects all my different things, saying, oh, you're the same guy that worked over there. You worked with EOStack, you worked with Theo, you worked with this company called FoxyCart. Like these relationships I've had of what I've done in the world, it's the combination of those in the real world that creates my relational connection with another human being, where they go, I trust Luke, he's actually done some things in the world I can verify. It's only when that information combines together, like we talked about earlier, those sticks all bound together, that someone has an image of me in their mind that they can interact with effectively. And so when I think about this, I think that, these individual relationships that can't talk to each other cryptographically, they're completely separate. Someone's inevitably going to bring them together, because that's how we interact as humans.
No, but you control whether or not they come together. That's the key point here. You don't allow, if you have these, as you said, they're disparate. No one can know, by having a relationship on Facebook does not give Facebook any ability, cryptographically speaking, to find out whether you have a relationship with Google. There's no way for them to do that. Okay. But if Facebook says, I'd like you to disclose your relationship with Google, and you say, okay, then that's on you. Right? Because yes, you could create these things. And as you mentioned before, there's thousands of relationships that you have. All of them contribute what you might want to call relationship-specific disclosures to your overarching identity, that you are the only person who can see the whole thing. But someone comes to you, and I'm going to take the Chinese government standard, right? You're a non-Chinese citizen, and you have no relationship with China, but you decide to go to China, right? And when you get there and you've got your the self-sovereigns, I call it the Kevlar project, the idea being bulletproof ID. If you walk in with your Kevlar wallet and it's accepted as a border control device, and they say, okay, in order for us to give you your 2-week tourist visa, we want you to disclose this. And the list is all your financial transactions 2 weeks before and up to 4 weeks after you leave, whether they're in country or not, we don't care, right? All your commercial transactions. We want all the name, your personal data, where you live, where you're going to be staying, all that other stuff. And we want you to put on GPS tracking so that we can track you wherever you go for the duration of your visa stay. And you look at that as you're sitting there at the airport and you go, right? But they could ask that. And there's no reason they shouldn't ask it if that's what they want to do. And this is when it comes back to the whole concept of, while individuals are completely private, groups have to disclose publicly what their disclosure requirements are at a minimum, and who their owners / persons of significant control are, so that people can, before interacting with the relationship, can look at it and go, oh yeah, I'm not going to China. I just saw their visa requirements. They basically want to know everything about me, and they're going to store it locally. No, right? I don't want to do that. And that's fine. The other option, the other extreme is I go to a bank in a country that's very enlightened, and they decide that they've connected with this infrastructure, and they recognize the fact that it is less assailable than any other identification protocol out there. I mean, everything's assailable. If it's made by man, it can be broken by man. That's one of my little philosophies. But it's the least assailable solution out there for identification. And the bank can simply go in and say, you walk into the bank and say, I want to open an account with you. And all they're going to say is, I want your identity to confirm in a binary answer that you meet these criteria. And the criteria would be, do you live in the country, if that's a requirement? Are you old enough to open a bank account? And do you have any black marks in your financial history? Right? And if your collective identity says no, none of those apply to this guy, or rather, this guy's good to go for you, they get a binary answer back, forms a relationship with you, and you're accountable, right? So you can't, and there's no way for you to lie about this, because all the data that's coming in, or rather being checked, was securely created with other relationships you set up. So you can't lie.
An example that I've heard talked about is like a carbon credit is not a carbon credit is not a carbon credit. Meaning you get a carbon credit from Germany, it's different than a carbon credit from some backwards country that's like, yeah, whatever, we just, rubber stamped it because the, bureaucrat got paid, $5 under the table. So the idea that we'd have to expose, basically, if I'm understanding the model, we'd have to expose some level of threshold of validity to these other validations. The bank wants to know it wasn't your brother Jim Bob Joe that says you're, that you live here. It's actually some reputable entity that I can validate cryptographically, right?
Well, that's again back to your relationships, right? You as an entity will have a relationship with yourself. This was one of the little key tweaks I had to figure out. And every entity has a relationship with itself. That relationship with yourself is where all your analytics show. So what is the quality of your verification of your name, your birth date, your place of residence? And it's all based on the other relationships you have and the quality of those relationships with respect to authority. For example, if you're talking about your name, birth date, and place of birth, for example, you would say, okay, well, who verified that? And maybe it's, Comply Advantage, KYC provider, or it's your government verified it. So the governments, if you're to say an American government, then you probably get a really high rating on the quality of that particular piece of data. And that would go into your self-relationship as the quality of the name attribute of this person is 90% or 98% or whatever the case may be. And all of that is done analytically based on the ongoing ratings of every entity out there. So as adoption accrues and what you would call disputes are started to, start to get show up in the system, saying, no, that guy's not a real person. And the U.S. government said he was a real person. So the U.S. government's rating just went down a tick because they authorized somebody who wasn't real. When you get down to that level, then, and those relationships, it's all off chain, really. It's all analytics feeding into it, right? So it's off chain. It doesn't consume any of your, precious resources in the world, but it is analytically provable that these things are real.
So I'd love to hear Alex's thought on that, but the last comment that I'm still trying to wrap my head around is I then have to expose, you started giving examples like Vantiv KYC or whatever, US government, I then have to choose to expose those relationships with others as it relates to me and the relational identity I'm connecting with some other entity. And so that self-relationship with myself.
You don't.
Is that piece something that I can't write to without other people writing to as well? So I can't just like can lie about it, basically. So that self-relationship is where, the government or whatever, they choose to write to that relationship in a way that others.
No. The self-relationship is analytics only.
What's that?
It's analytics only. It's analytics only. It looks at all your relationships, right? And it grabs the ratings or the strength or the quality ratings or whatever it is where I haven't gone down the rabbit hole yet on all those, but I know it's doable. But it's an analytics rating on each of your relationships as it relates to the various disclosures that are currently available to you. And it gives an overall ranking of those based on the relationships you've formed. So when you form a relationship with Comply Advantage, sure, Comply Advantage gets all your passport information and all that stuff in order to verify you, but it's locked, right? They can't expose it unless a court order shows up and they're forced to. Otherwise, it's locked and tight. But Comply Advantage is doing that for thousands of people. And the number of fraud or fake ID cases that get filed against them tells you how, versus the number they actually process, tells you how good they are, right? But that's an analytics thing. That's off-chain. But your personal ID can now go and point to, well, I got my ID verified by Comply Advantage, and their current ranking is blah, 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 right? And you can disclose without you don't get to actually type this in, right? This is all being done automatically in the back end. You get to disclose to another potential relationship, that your identity was verified by a verifier that has a ranking of blank currently. And that, even if that changes over time, it would always be the current ranking, right? So you get a really good dynamic system, right? Some KYC providers will be really high at the beginning and then they'll tail off over time. Governments will come in and you'll say, wait a minute, that Zimbabwean verification you got? Sorry, buddy. But they just plummeted below 50%. We're not trusting that.
Honestly,
Alex?
Yeah, I've been listening to you, and I see many things here. One of these, like, if you want to provide really privacy, probably then you will miss accountability. Like, for example, I'm not sure if you know, I don't mean you, Mark, people that they are listening, they know about zero-knowledge proof or homomorphic encryption. There are ways to create full privacy without disclaiming any kind of information. First thing is, like, I don't believe we should have a number. I'm not a number. So my identity, probably, there's a lot of private keys, public keys, but not a DID. I think DIDs are for public organizations, maybe cars, but not for people. That's one thing. And then if I'm
going to stop you right there, Alex. Just before you go any further, you are a number. You just don't recognize the fact that you're a number.
No. The fact that I am.
Which number is he?
He's
many numbers.
Alex Puig, living in Barcelona. Which, if you're speaking to somebody who has been a bushman all his life and doesn't speak any other language, you might as well be speaking in numbers. It's a linguistic convention that your name is not a number. It is a number, as much as a number is a number. Does that make sense?
I work with a few Chinese people, and they love it because, like, the number of my name, it means success, something like that. So they love working with me just because of the number. but I mean, like, the way we approach relations, like, we use zero-knowledge proof, and what we do is, like, if I get verified, like I do my KYC. Instead of having a credential proving my KYC, something signed by someone else saying that it's me, we create a generator of proof. So basically, the issuer gives me a generator of proof I can use every time I get a new relation, meaning that my identity is really completely different for everyone. And even I'm using the same KYC, 2 or 3 different people, they could not see that they are talking also to me. So
that's exactly what I was saying.
All of these relations.
The relationship IDs?
Yep,
right, but the relationship ID is exactly that. It's a mathematical function, doesn't need zero knowledge, thank God, because that's a bit of a load on the client side. But
no, right now,
bearing in mind, remember, there's no servers in the core. None.
There's a library you can use. It's called Zenroom, quite useful.
Yeah,
and then they have zero knowledge proof integrated, and and it works pretty well on the client side. But
when I was showing there that unique RID that I mentioned in the model, that every relationship has a unique RID. It's globally unique.
Yeah, but
it's basically based on the public keys of the two parties.
But Marco, there's no ID. Like zero knowledge proof, it's just a proof. It's like somebody else verify my identity, and I'm just saying like, yes, this is me. I can do this. Like I live in Barcelona, or I'm a member of some community, or I work at a company. All of these relations, they could become zero knowledge proof, meaning that there's no ID at all. It's just because like every time I'm just proving anything. Like real privacy, real anonymity. It's not that if I talk to you and then I talk to someone else, both of you can track me. It means that if I talk to you and I talk to you again, you cannot say that it's me again. That's real privacy.
Okay, and that's why we do it this way. We don't do the zero knowledge thing in that respect, because if you talk to somebody once and you set up a relationship, every discussion you have with them afterwards must be knowable as you. That's where accountability comes in. And if you don't have accountability, if you don't have accountability in the system, no one will use it. It's much like we've been having this battle about how you set up a DAO in the world, right? When DAOs are supposed to be jurisdictionless, autonomous organizations. And the real problem with that is that if you are jurisdictionless, then you have no legal foundation. If you have no legal foundation, I have no reason to trust you. I'm not going to send you money. I'm not going to expect you to send me money because there's just no way for me to legally even believe that would be possible. Accountability is a thing that normally is handled in our world by me presenting you with a driver's license and a utility bill, and you feeling comfortable that, okay, I know who he is, at least the government says that's who he is, and I know where he lives, at least the utility company says that's where he lives. So I'm reasonably feel safe that I can call the police and send them to his place, and they will be able to arrest him if he screws me over. I'm trying to move beyond that and say, no, I don't want to have to give you all of that. I just want to be able to give you a unique relationship ID between me and you that says, while this relationship exists, you can always reach out and touch me if I've done bad things, and I can always reach out and touch you if you've done bad things. But there's no reason for me to share with you stuff that you could cross-match with anybody else.
Yeah, but one of the things, like, not all relations are the same and should have the same privacy level. Meaning, if we are companies and I want to pay for something, then obviously I want accountability. But if not, like there are many situations right now, physically and digitally, that I don't need that accountability, and probably I don't want it. Even like
name one.
Guys, let me jump in 1 second. I don't want to. Sure. I want to continue this conversation, but we're getting a ton of good questions in the chat. And Marco, at your convenience and discretion, I'd like to engage some of these people also and get them off mute and have the free for all. So.
Yeah, let's go to town.
Okay, so I got my buddy Jan Kyle. Jan, you're asking a question. You know, of course we got a whole bunch of good people, but I'm gonna start with Jan. Jan, by the way, is primarily living in Ukraine. I've been to his dacha. I've had shashlik with him, which is sort of Russian-Ukrainian barbecue, but he's a German expatriate. So go put that all together. Jan, introduce yourself and then maybe ask that question.
Yeah.
I miss Banya.
Good morning or good evening.
I so miss Banya.
Marco, next time Corona is behind us and you are able to fly to Ukraine without having a residential status, please, my door is very well open. Very well open.
Yeah, I currently can't leave. I'm in the same boat. They closed the airport.
Yeah. I don't know how much important it is to introduce myself. I'm just a random guy, a little bit connected to blockchain since 2015. Working for an Ukrainian outsourcing company. We are supporting startups, but also, let's say, so the old economy, the old industries, optimizing their business processes. So for me, it is very important to understand actually and discuss you discussed a lot of technical aspects over the last period and decided whether we are a number or not. Let's keep that let's keep it as it is. Okay, there is technology involved, and maybe yes, technology should not be on the forefront, because like my grandmother is using the internet and she don't know ADP or JavaScript about. So let's keep it there. I believe that if we speak about self-sovereign identities, we also have to think about the business models and the business cases that need to change. At the moment, we see that trust and data is locked down in silos, whether in America as the guiding nation with all their Facebooks and Google and whatsoever, then the Asians coming in with Alibaba, and then a little tiny percentage, we have the European digital providers. So if you speak about a self-sovereign identity, and most likely about a self-sovereign identity which is built on top of blockchain, I mean, we know self-sovereign identity can be built again without blockchain, but if we put it on blockchain and if we decentralize it, then we are thinking about the rules, right? We are changing the rules of business. We are fucking with the revenue stream. Sorry for my French. And,
that is my mission in life, to fuck with the system. Where's James Haft when you need him?
So I would like to first of all also understand, because I haven't eaten all the knowledge with a golden spoon. So I also don't have the silver bullet, but so that's why I would like to learn, but also then listening to you maybe contribute. So what is the business model that needs to change? Yeah, it's no longer the user who is to be seen as a product, because the users then will keep their data, and we mentioned it, zero knowledge proofs will help us to share information. So all these business models will need to change.
Yes, exactly.
And what's your vision? What's your idea? How we can do this on board? I mean, those in power, and I'm not kind of Illuminati or, but those in power, they don't want to give it away. That's clear.
Well, and this was one of the key points, right? Is that whether or not you like the idea of being assigned a number, the reason that that we have all this data going around about ourselves is because we have to prove we're accountable, right? We have to prove we're accountable to a certain degree to Facebook. We have to prove we're accountable to Google. Often that involves putting down a credit card, for example. Which is another form of identity. You have to prove to your bank that you exist in a jurisdiction that they're allowed to serve. So you have to do all this anyway. But if you could build it into an infrastructure where nobody owned it and nobody controlled it other than the collective, all people controlled it through a very high level governance process, and you've got it fully decentralized, then people connecting will simply choose to use that as their method of connecting versus another tool. And the disclosure pieces, which is what we're really concerned about here, right? It's what are you disclosing and what can they do with the stuff you've disclosed? And there will be a race to the bottom once this kind of thing gets going, in terms of service providers, businesses, if you will, saying, well, I require you to give me all of this. And it could be, you know, everything that's on your passport, everything that's on your utility bill, and, you know, your last 5 jobs, and what your performance reviews were, and everything else, all that other stuff that may or may not be already set up within your identity. And there'll be another guy who comes along and says, I'll give you the exact same service, but all I want is your name. In fact, it can be a pseudonym if you like. And then I want proof that these things exist in your identity. Okay. Which is basically just your identity says yes, no. Now, you're right. It's going to completely upend a lot of business models, because a lot of business models are based on the idea that they can reach out and touch you outside the context of their business. Mm-hmm. This would eliminate that ability. You would not be able to reach out and touch this person outside the context of your initial relationship.
Let me pause this one sec. I think, Sergey, I wanted to bring you in, and I think you have a related question or an independent question that we're going to throw into the mix here.
Yes, finally, words goes to my side also. Yes, we have huge community watching us on the TV channel, but question is not mine. The question is from Aaron. He will not able to join us, and he eager to know how to apply this concept to the airline industry in manner to protect personal data. What's your alternative to Common Pass, for example, please, Marco?
Well, it's literally, if you think about it, what is the Common Pass? It's a form of verification that you've gone through that says that your passport is real, that your residence is real, and all these kinds of things. And they just packaged it as a relationship between you and Common Pass. And the airline industry has said, if you've got a Common Pass, we're okay with you flying. And if in this model, your relationship with Common Pass would be one relationship. Okay. And then your relationship with the airline would require you to disclose, do you have a Common Pass? Yes, no. And you don't get to answer the question. When I keep saying that, do you have one? It's not about whether or not you say you have one. It's, is there a record in your local self-sovereign identity database that says Common Pass has passed you? And if that record exists, send a yes back to the airline. And you would probably do that when you bought the ticket.
But the main thing, it's that probably SSI is the closest thing to the non-digital world. In the past, like when you bought something, it was printed and then you have it and you own it, and then you just go there and you decide to disclose who you are, and you decide to show the board pass, and then you get in. And then everything changed a lot, and maybe we can go back to that, something that's really close to the physical world, but it's just another relation, as Marco said. Answering also the other question, I do believe that identity, I'm not saying digital, identity should have no business model, because basically it's ours. It's like paying for the air, and no, it's something you should not pay for. But then you can build a lot of different services on top of that will add a lot of value, and probably these services will add UX, will add recovery, will add a lot of things that we need to have this kind of identity, and so it can work. But then it's like, if you have this, you have control on your identity, on your relationships. An airline is just another relation. It's no, it's simple. And then you have standards. The good thing is, like, you can work with the standards, and all of the board pass in the world would become exactly the same. So I can use that not just for that, but also to go to buy to the marketplace, to everywhere else. So,
yes,
I mean, think about it. It's almost like if your One Pass or your Common Pass card and your passport and your driver's license were all white with a picture of you on them, and the word driver's license or passport or everything else is white. If you've got the card and the picture matches, you're good to go.
That's something we should talk about, biometry, like face recognition, something I'm really afraid of.
Yes, I completely agree with Alex, but we have to have some kind of opportunity to share our, biometric information or something else without sharing it in original. Do we have any chances to do it? For example, to passing through the airlines. We're talking about that case. We're not talking about how to identify ourselves on the point. Yes, on the point of the view. We're talking about identify ourselves without sharing all that stuff about us.
That can be done. Also, like zero-knowledge proof, there are many technologies that allows us to do that. But then I think it's quite important, like when it comes to biometry, big problem is like you get to work with silos of information, and like the airport, they need to store all of the faces of everyone. And if anybody steals that information, that's really a big leak. So it's a lot of sensible information that nobody should have. It's only me. Or maybe we could have like a service. Imagine a service that they become our biometric provider because we trust them. Okay. And then
we talked about the KYC.
Yeah.
Remember, Alex, we were talking about the KYC. Exactly. They take a selfie, right? They require you to send them a selfie. So you can now, that selfie is now a disclosure data that you can share on demand at any point at the airline or wherever. You can share the selfie that was verified by a KYC provider. Yeah, and then the people look at that, look at you, good to go.
No, but there's a better way. Even so, they can do automatically, meaning that you have relations. Why not use these relations? If I have two relations, one with the airport and one with my biometric provider, the airport can take a picture, sign this picture digitally, send it to me. I send it to the airport, to the biometric provider that's recognized by the airport, and then they give me back that picture made by the airport, signed by them. So even I'm in the middle, there's no way I can change these signatures from the different providers, not the airport, not the provider. And the airport, they don't need to have my identity, or the bank, or wherever I go. They don't need to have my biometric information. I just need to trust a well-known biometric provider. So we can solve that. And nobody needs to know
that's
a picture of my face.
That's a real world, like on the spot, certified. In other words, you've taken the human out of that picture, right?
Yep.
No human is required to verify your face. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I suspect that the real world scenarios will likely be, some of them will go that route, no argument. And maybe down the road, all of them will go that route. But I think for initial, when we start this thing, that little selfie you had to take to get your KYC verification, which is now a disclosable factor within your self-sovereign ID, you can expose it for 10 seconds, right? You can say, expose this to this potential relationship I'm going to have, expose this for 10 seconds to them. And their app literally pops up the picture of you for 10 seconds and they get to look at it, look at you, look at it, look at you and go, oh yeah, check, I'm good with that. This is who they say they are.
Before we get to Gabby, I just want to make another comment on the business model part that relates to kind of what you just said. You earlier said it's going to be a race to the bottom where people are going to, care about their privacy and be like, oh, well, I won't work with this because they're asking for too much information. But I want to propose the concern I have that it'll go the opposite direction. Meaning, well, now that I only accept your global ID and there's no other form of authentication that I like, and you really like my service and you really aren't smart enough to care about privacy, I'm going to ask for everything from the kitchen sink because I can no longer go get it from the advertising network, where previously, if I just had your email, I could know everything about you. If I just had your IP address and your cookies on your browser, I can know everything about you. Now that I can't, I have to be like a Hoover vacuum and suck up as much information as I can for my own database because I know I can't get it anywhere else and I can't correlate it with anything else. So I'm concerned that it's going to actually lead to the opposite because people want the service and they don't value their own data as they should.
Let me.
Would you stand for that, Luke?
Pause for 1 second. Gabby,
I'm saying my opinion is irrelevant. It's what the market's going to do that matters.
Not when a lot of people like you out there screaming bloody murder. Oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. Right?
Again, I'm the guy that's been completely public for 10 plus years on my identity, right? I'm not the example of privacy because I want to control my conversation about the thing that we consider Luke Stokes.
Right, guys, let me jump in 1 second. Guillaume, if I'm saying your name correctly, Guillaume Draven?
Yeah.
Hey, if you're comfortable with it, turn on the video just so we can see your smiling face. Or if you're mourning inappropriate, it's okay too.
It's fine. Hello.
Nice background.
Guillaume, ça va? Ça roule?
Très bien, oui.
Please go ahead.
Okay.
Question.
Yeah, I have a question because I see some danger in this kind of system. Is the case where you are forced to reveal some information. In that case, you cannot cheat. You cannot try to give wrong information because then everything is cryptographically can be checked.
Proven.
For instance, you gave the example of China. Okay, I won't. I decide not to go there. Good, but now, let's say you are somewhere else, and then the police, because they ask you to give the information, and if you don't give it, you go to prison, for instance. And in that case, okay, maybe sometimes you will be forced to reveal the information, and then there is no way you can cheat. You see what I mean?
I love that question. In fact, I was in a conference in Brussels, I think it was, and we spent around half an hour debating on my right to lie to people. So
right. Well, this is one of the downsides of a trustable digital identity, is that in order for the identity the things you build around your digital identity, in order for them to be trustable, and if they're not trustable, what's the freaking point? Why are we even bothering? But in order to make them trustable, lying has to be impossible.
Yeah, but the problem is that
which is uncomfortable. I get it.
Yeah, but the problem is that when you are forced to disclose some data, sometimes you can lie by omission, like by not telling. Maybe you don't lie, but you just don't answer. But in that case, they can have access to all your information. Like they say, okay, give us your private key, else you go to prison for 10 years. Okay, I will give my private keys, and then they will have access to everything.
Yeah. Governments are less democratic every time, so probably they will ask us like, "What's your religion?" or "What's your social orientation?" I want to be able to lie about that.
Yeah.
Probably there. Of course, I cannot lie about taxes. I know that, but if I want to lie about my sexual life, why not?
Yeah, exactly. For instance, I think it's a good analogy when you install an app on your Android phone. It asks you, hey, this app requires this authorization and this permission and so on and so on. So you can refuse. But what I would like to do, like for instance, some apps, they ask you for your GPS position and they don't need it. So why cannot say, okay, I will give you a fake GPS position? Why not? This kind of stuff.
Okay, now you're talking about and here's the real problem. Right? What you're getting to is that you want to lie, or rather, you want to lie by omission, right? And when you do disclosures and things like that, that is the case. In a situation where a government official asks you to disclose, and this is part of what's going to have to happen over time. There will be cases, especially for the first, and my guess is 25 years that this is used, where there will be people who overstep. Tell me your private key, right? Well, ideally, you don't know your private key because the system has been built decently enough that you don't actually ever have to interact with your private key. But if they say, I need you to disclose all your relationships, everything, to us, that's on record. Okay, that's the first thing that is a policing function of the design here, is that when someone says I need you to disclose everything, and they are not an individual, they are a group, right? They're the police force, they're the government, whatever it is, and they say disclose everything, that is recorded, that's on chain, that is publicly viewable. The fact, not the data, but the fact that a full disclosure was demanded by group X, that will get the activists involved. If for no other reason than that's heinous and it should not be allowed and whatever. Eventually, UN's going to come up with the "thou shalt not" kind of concept that no one's allowed to rape you of your personal data, whether they're a government or not. But until we get there, yes, these are going to happen, and there's not much you can do about it. But the point I guess I'm trying to make is that the person who did it, the auspices under which they were doing it, the group they represented, that's all on record publicly that they did it. So the system itself would have.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to think, I think you answered my question about the defense mechanism against the hoovering up of data, and it's a compelling argument. I like it. One of the things that I guess I want to see next is an entire presentation on this kind of self-referential relationship that has all my analytics and how that's actually done in a decentralized way, because I think that is the magic sauce to this whole thing. If you can do that, you've built a trust network, you've built a reputation system, you've got, like we get back, Wolf was on the call earlier and he's always hammering and hammering and hammering away how it's reputation, it's reputation, it's reputation. And so you're essentially describing this reputation thing where it's like, oh yeah, you'll be able to know if an entity hoovered up your data, but it's like, I don't understand how, because that relationship ID is a unique global identifier and it's not connected to me until I disclose it and say, hey, everybody, this group here tried to screw me over and take all my data. How is that actually known?
Well, actually, the relationship ID is public.
But
the relationship ID is public.
To a conscious person, right? It's like I have to be the one complaining to the, the privacy advocates.
Yes, and then one of the sort of the core sort of tenets of this would be determining from analytics, right, when you made a disclosure that was unreasonable. Right? So you decided to disclose to somebody everything or significant components of things. And especially when that is happening to a group or an individual that represents a government or a corporation. Those kinds of things would be inbuilt red flags that would stand up. And then the people who are you related to,
I've only ever
the
seen
people you're
that happen
related
in a
to.
centralized way, right? Like when you say it gets
Well,
flagged,
it is. It's centralized in your app.
Centralized model I've ever been. There's some custodians, or there's some moderators, or there's some human conscious interaction to say, oh, that was bad, but that was okay, right? We're making a moral claim almost about whether something was obscene or not, and that is the part that I'm still like, how do we do that in a decentralized way?
That's third-party centralized analytics. That's centralized in the sense that activist groups will form their own analytics engine that watches the infrastructures and says, oh, that doesn't look good. And wait a minute, 1,000 identity tracking requests were issued by the NSA last 5 minutes ago. 1,000 for what? Those kinds of things. That would be something that a third-party activist group would do and probably would publish on a website of some kind.
For that to work, then
that would just be AI tracking anomalies.
Everyone pause. I want to thank our esteemed leader in other contexts, Timothy Lewis, for jumping on board. Tim, just a sentence about yourself and then go.
Just trying to be a decent human being. Yeah, I think ultimately you'd have AI that would just track and pick up anomalies for record tracking. And I think that would just probably be built in on decentralized systems. And then
or not, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and then we would just you probably just have more visibility to people who were doing things that were outside of the characteristic norms of things, and whether or not people would go and check in on people if something strange was happening. I think that'd be up to the communities. But yeah, no, it sounds interesting. Would you not be able to do some sort of false flag for, again, if what I was thinking about for if someone was requesting access to your bucket of information, not assuming they wouldn't be able to point out, hey, this is your key, you have the key to this account. Would you not be able to be supplied with some other, basically kind of blank slate tabula rasa type of identification that could really just give them nothing but verifies everything you have?
Well, yeah, that's the goal, is to get to the point where the platform is trusted enough that they don't need to see the data. They just need to know that the platform authenticates that the data exists.
Sure, but in Alex's point, the baseball bat to the head problem always exists, right? So you have to be able to defend for that. The defense I like on my ledger is I give you a different PIN, and you're looking at accounts that have nothing in them. Right, and I'd imagine you could build out a similar type system to where, I just have to prove that minimums. I have one account that basically has my biological information, my some of my details, that are just bare minimum. That if someone says, "Hey, you need to identify yourself," I say, "This is me," and they could do nothing else to prove otherwise.
Yes, sort of yes and no in that respect. I mean, if someone's asking you to identify yourself for some reason, I don't see why they need to know how many crypto accounts you have and what their balances are. I don't think you would ever disclose that in your right mind.
Crooked governments are crooked governments, right? So people,
agree.
If they know you have an account with everything that's linked to it, they will ask you for everything because they will. And if you needed to come up with an identity to say to where they couldn't, there would be no way to tie someone to any of the physical blobs on the network that existed, you could have a false flag identity. You could have something else that would have your bare minimum identification, or some degree of it. Maybe looking at that as being able to maintain.
That would be doable. Yeah, that would be doable. That would actually be a service that some very smart people would set up on this platform as basically as a service that creates a cleansed and reasonably benign profile that you can share with people if you don't want to disclose all the truth. The problem is that it's going to be basically like viruses, right? Guy writes a virus, Someone writes a virus cure for it. Guy makes a better virus. Virus company makes a better cure, and it's just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's back to that whole thing. There's nothing humans can build that humans can't break. Which is the philosophical real pain in the ass about this whole thing.
Well, actually, I don't know if that's true. I mean, kind of the premise behind Ethereum and all these blockchains, and maybe even AI, is that we can create something that's beyond us. The act of creating something is not necessarily the act of breaking it. Especially when you get
No. I wasn't saying that it was the act of. I was saying that if we built it, we can find a way to break it.
But again, I'm not saying that's necessarily true. It's like when you get in it's like, you know, once the nuclear genie gets out of the bottle, it's kind of hard to put it back in. There's some things you put out there that take on a life of their own and get beyond our control. It depends on your definition of break, but I think there's, again, you know, when things acquire their own dynamics, the fact that we initially launched them doesn't make them eternally under our control.
I would say that the only example I can think of that actually applies to that would be AI. If we actually build a self-learning AI, then that one get away.
I mean, that's like the only exception is the thing that's going to change our entire planet right now. That's fine. I can see the main revolution that's happening right now is the exception, but I'll even go beyond there. I mean, the premise of Ethereum and Bitcoin and its followers is, you know, if Satoshi showed up, I don't think you can go, I changed my mind, pull the plug. It's, you know, or if you design a virus and release it, it's like, you know, I changed my mind. Hey, virus, come back. You know, a lot of these dynamics, I think, and this, like most technology, cuts both ways. You can set up beneficial systems so that, you know, to use Tim's, I like that expression, right? Baseball to the head, you know, error, flaw, whatever you said, that was good. You can set up systems that are beyond you, and maybe that's a good thing. You know, and lots of science fiction, you know, actually the Matrix is about, I'm going to send myself a mission and then forget that I sent myself a mission, or Total Recall. That's not too far away, right? I'm going to use myself as a pawn piece in the chess game I've set up. So I think identity could potentially go down that route as well.
I mean, these are all tools.
Yeah.
You know, you can build a house with a brick, or you can break a window, and these are all technology tools. But throughout history, there's been an interesting conversation about how the instigators of a certain technology are held accountable to what they created. You know, when you think of Oppenheimer, what's the first thing that comes to mind, right? It's the technology invented, you know, and so, and the crazy thing about that is even the guy who built the mustard gas that killed so many people, was kind of a horrible human being, also invented nitrogen-based fertilizers, which, you know, provided food for millions and billions of people. So I think as technologists I think these conversations are important, for one. I've tried to engage certain people that are like, no, I don't want to have that conversation. It's evil, it's bad. You're going to harm a whole bunch of millions of people because IBM provided the machines that enabled them to do the Holocaust. You know, I've heard that argument. And so I'm like, okay, but at the same time, I feel like it's inevitably happening. If we don't do it to ourselves, I almost guarantee you AI is going to do it, because we're these fleshy meat bags and they're going to want to have a way to, you know, itemize us as data points, right? So it's going to happen. And the idea being, let's do it with some foresight of like, okay, historically, what has gone bad for our species based on our own fallacies and our own problems and our own, you know, psychoses and whatever. And let's try to build that into the system enough so that there's a bit of protection. So one of the things that I'm concerned about primarily with the model, Marco, is that there's no recovery that I can see when I lose my password, when I lose my private key, when I somehow get disconnected from this. What's the process for recreating myself? Because if you inject that process into the system, you've now broken it. You've now created a mechanism to defraud the system, right? If I can't hit reset, you know, you've also got a problem where, you know, somebody was a bad person, but they've actually reformed. How long will it take them to rebuild their identity? Can they pull a reset and start from zero?
And Marco, before we respond to that, let me say in alignment with that, you know, and again, I'm coming from a lawyer perspective, and I'm coming from a perspective of someone who used to do estate planning. I mean, people lose capacity. They get senile. They end up in a hospital. You have to do power of attorney. There's not situations where they're always dead and there's clear instructions about what to do. And I think there's going to be situations where you have to assume someone else's identity. That's kind of like doing the power of attorney. And yeah, that's the equivalent of forgetting, but not sloppy or lazy forgetting, but life happened forgetting. So how do you roll with it?
Okay, so we've thought quite a bit about that, and I'm not going to get into the technical details, but there are at least 7 paths we've come up with to reliably recover from a catastrophic failure. And whether that's a catastrophic neuron failure or a catastrophic environmental failure, hurricane, earthquake, blah, 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 where you've lost all your methods of connecting to your identity, including your 12-word mnemonic or whatever the other cases may be. So the recovery component is a doable thing. And in fact, there are lots of initiatives out there right now working and or in beta for recovery that expands beyond just your 12-word phrase, or you stored it in a safe and that kind of thing. So that's there. Let's just, for argument's sake, not get down the technical details. There is a recovery component built in, and it is a recovery of the core key, because everything else is just a link to the core key.
Can I use that as a bad actor reset though? I've scammed you all now. I've done my DeFi rug pull, and now I lost my key. I need to recover and become someone else.
No.
Well,
you can't do that. Now that's the real problem that we're facing here is that it goes back to this thing where people don't forgive, right? Which socially is probably net a bad thing, but because you can lie easily in public now.
I don't necessarily agree with that. People don't forget, especially women.
No, they don't forgive. They don't forgive. You can remember and forgive. And people can move forward with forgiveness. They cannot move forward if there is no forgiveness. Now, forgetting is effectively lying. If you think about it, he forgot that I went to jail, and I'm not going to remind him that I went to jail when I apply for this job, right? That you can't really do anything about in this scenario. Is that if you've been to jail and you were identifiable on this platform when you went to jail, and the court was using this system as its identity management internally, then your criminal record is now part of your identity. Whether you disclose it or not is up to you, and whether somebody who's having a relationship with you asks whether or not you have a criminal record is up to them. But if they ask you whether you have a criminal record or not, you can't say no. You can just say, I don't want a relationship with you. Right?
I think it's possible to have a reset in some very special case. Like, for instance, it's possible for somebody to change name. But then you have to go to a legal process. So it's possible, probably, for some reason, if the government
doesn't change your identity.
Yeah, if the government agrees that, okay, I don't know, I want to protect you, and I want to change your identity because we want to protect you, so then you can create just create new keys, and then the government will validate your identity with a new passport and so on. So in some cases, I think it's possible.
I see what you're saying. So you're talking about witness protection concept, right?
Yeah, that's an example, yes.
Right. Okay. So if this is implemented correctly, you don't need witness protection anymore. Your government will change your name. That's fine. Or possibly governments will get together and actually allow people to change their citizenships as well as their name. But because if you had things in your past, for example, that point to you and are connected to people you're trying to run from for whatever reason, you can delete those relationships. Now, that doesn't change the fact that they happened in the past, but it does now mean that nobody who is connected to those relationships can connect with you going forward. But your digital ID doesn't change, and your other relationships are still maintainable, and it's up to you or possibly an advisor who's talking to you from this government facility to say, you probably don't want to keep those relationships if you want to truly vanish from that world that you were in. But nobody can track you by your digital identity because nobody knows your digital identity. They just know you by the relationship ID, and every relationship ID is different. If you're a government, you have a relationship ID with a government, and it says that your name is blank, and then the government says, no, we're going to let you, you say, I want to change my name, and the government goes, sure. And you change your name, that just changes the name field on your relationship with that government. It doesn't change your identity.
But I'm not sure you can delete the relationship. I mean, you need to both agree to delete it. Else, I mean, the other organization can keep a copy.
They can only keep a copy. Well, technically, it's on chain, so there will always be a copy there, but it'll be locked, basically. You won't be able to open it if either party deletes it. That was one of the key stipulations for privacy from a privacy perspective. If you're connected to the Swiss government, for example, and the Swiss government deletes your identity with them, you are effectively not Swiss anymore. You, on the other hand, can also delete your identity with Switzerland, and if you do that, you're not Swiss anymore either. But the Swiss government still has a pointer to a guy who used to be Swiss but deleted his relationship. And your record will show that you were Swiss up until this point in time, and then you stop being Swiss. Now, whether or not the Swiss government lets you get away with that, per se, they can put caveats on their relationship engine that says, oh, you can go ahead and delete it, but there's a 7-year time hold on it. The banks will be doing this, right? You can delete the relationship, which means you can no longer work with us, but we get to keep your record for 7 years, right? And you'll just see on your side, on your self-sovereign ID, you'll see a ticker going down, right? 6 years, 364 days, and 12 hours to go.
That's illegal in some countries. In Spain, that's illegal. You are Spanish forever. And I think if you are from the USA, you have to pay taxes wherever you live in the world, no matter what. So,
right. Very hard to.
No. But that's a function of the relationship with each of those governments, right? They define it. They get to define what the disclosure.
James is usually good at dropping wisdom bombs. So James, what was the
question? I have a question, teacher. So I tried to match your shirt, Marco. I couldn't get the exact shade, but this
Coral.
is me.
It's a Caribbean thing.
Me trying to go sympathetic. Okay. So, how does this intermingle with the concept of avatars and starting to be represented by multiple entities, which could be corporations are a synthetic existence created by law, right? So a corporation is a person under the law. So I envision that we're all going to have avatars that are going to be persons that will be in jurisdictions that we choose, some of which may be physical and historic jurisdictions, but others could actually be, in the ether and synthetic. And that we could then have these avatars that could go out and have personalities and histories and form, basically be wallets with algorithms that are having them maximize activities for me, very much like the rich do through Panama and Switzerland for the last 200 years. And how would that, could those entities have ID individual and therefore take it away from the corporeal body and from your actual acts as a human and more towards what the acts are of those synthetic individuals?
Yes. That's actually easily doable in this model. If you think of yourself as the principal who owns multiple corporations, each corporation having a staff and ownership of one, right, which is you, and then you go forward with each of those particular corporations and interact in different worlds. You individually are still accountable for the actions of each of those avatars, but the avatar is the one operating and building its own relationship history with particular ecosystems, right? Virtual ecosystems or physical ecosystems.
That's interesting. That's a good way. That's an interesting way of putting it.
Because one of the interesting things about the way the centralized systems have evolved, whether it's by necessity or not, is that you are required to surrender information which truthfully is not relevant to the transaction that you're looking to pursue, and then in a lot of ways penalized for having then been transparent. A perfect example of this is your FICO score, which is ridiculous and just a game that a bunch of corporations made so they can make money. And then that FICO score then all of a sudden starts showing up in your car insurance rates. and in other instances where really it's been shown, statistically that your FICO score has no correlation to the risk that's being assessed.
Mm-hmm. And especially for the rich, this will become very popular because you'll be able to spawn multiple, as Luke put it, personal DAOs, right? You'll be able to spawn multiples of these and fund them because you got lots of money. So all of a sudden, this isn't a guy just walking around with a particular, avatar picture and an avatar name and an avatar jurisdiction and da-da-da. It's a guy walking around with all that and 1,000 Bitcoin in his wallet, right? That he's now prepared to go out and do things with.
So, but it's not for the rich. Let me just put a little color on that. I actually think it's the opposite. I think this is the democratization of what the rich has had for the last 250, 300 years since the invention of Swiss banking, right? That the rich have been able to choose their jurisdiction, choose their tax rate, and choose how their inheritance patterns, et cetera, regardless of the political nature of where they were born and how they were supposed to be taxed, and that the poor have not had the access to that, or the unbanked and the non-wealthy, let's call them. And I think in the future this is going to be built into a token that costs nothing, and you'll be able to actually take this process as a service in an almost frictionless environment, and therefore it's going to be impossible or very difficult for the existing governments to tax and control you, because you'll have the same tools as the wealthy. That's why the wealthy have been doing it. The wealthy have been jurisdiction shopping and tax shopping for decades, for centuries.
Sure. Yeah, I did it myself. I moved to the Cayman Islands, but
you're the guy. I was always wondering.
I kind of feel like this idea of DAOs
You're that guy.
all makes sense in that as an individual, I can be private by creating these different personas, these avatars that represent myself, as James is describing. And this is kind of the idea, again, behind FIO. It's like, you don't have to have Luke at Stokes as your FIO name. It could be Gobbledygook, whatever. It could be Peter Pan at, whatever. And you have the ability to create these avatars that you control how exposed they are for different relationships. So the relationships themselves in this model is completely kind of this global unique identifier, but we actually do get value out of exposing those publicly to say, yeah, I am a member of whatever. I did graduate from this university. Go look at your LinkedIn page. All it is an exposure of these relationships that benefit you, right? And so when I'm thinking about this,
but you can lie on LinkedIn.
I think that you could still have this private individual with a public corporation type approach, so that as I interact with Marco, I'm like, yeah, it's not good enough to give me your avatar. I actually want to know you as a person. And same with Timothy and Gordon and just meeting Alex. It's like, I want to actually connect with people as human beings. So I might reject your avatar. But as a corporation, do I care if you're a human being or you've got 1,000 Bitcoin in your wallet? I certainly don't. I care about the 1,000 Bitcoin. So they might be okay with accepting an avatar relationship, because in their particular business model, if that person, is a bad actor and leaves, they're like, whatever, it doesn't matter. I can burn that relationship and it doesn't cost me anything. Whereas with voice.com or SenseChat or these other type of, trying to build new social models of interacting with real human beings and not just bots, in that context, it's like, yeah, we're not going to accept an avatar login, for example. Maybe there's a spin-off that does, and you get to start testing.
And this is the problem with James's model, right? If you go down that road where avatars are obviously identifiable as different from real human beings, then you're, unfortunately, the government where you live, and again, my sympathies go out to everyone with an American passport.
Thanks.
They're not going to accept that avatar. They're going to say, no, that avatar is you. And that avatar is you, and that avatar is you, and you have to disclose all avatars, right? Which basically puts you right back in the crap again.
But again, this is the beauty of this system, right? If it's actually encrypted and private, I get, as you said earlier, I get to decide which relationships I disclose, even with the government. Now, they might threaten me to put me in a cage if I don't disclose a relationship I have with some entity that they think is bad. But ultimately,
or as your font say, they can threaten to nuke you.
The governments are businesses in that they want tax dollars, right? These jurisdiction shopping, like you're talking about. So I do think there's going to be, they've already done this with Citizens United. It's like this idea that you can be a company and have personhood as far as the government's concerned. And so I think it's an example of that, right?
Yeah, well, that's true. Exactly. But, you know, as for example, the Cayman Company thing is a great thing. You now find out that if you're an American citizen and you open up a Cayman company and you start doing tax-free business, the profits of that company accrue to you as personal income because it's American owned. It's deemed as an American company for tax purposes. If it's American owned.
There's ways around that. But yes, that is the general principle.
Don't have American ownership.
Thanks, go on.
I mean, one of the things is that as we move towards a decentralized global society and economy, that you start to go towards the truth without trusting concept. And, you know, is identity actually relevant, or is what's relevant, whether you actually, going back to the property law question that Gordon and I talked about earlier, which is, you know, you can only take from me what I have to give. And so when you're doing a transaction, is it relative? Is it relevant whether or not I'm a felon or not? Or do you just care if I have the digital asset in my wallet? And do you want to trade this for that? And the issue of getting beyond that for information doesn't have to do with the transaction or security. It has to do with morality, right? It has to do with people trying to impose other filters on my relationship with others to fulfill their guides. So they'll come up with BS about how crypto funds terrorism, which is just the dumbest thing you could ever hear, right? Or, you know, governments fund terrorism, by the guys, if anyone cares. And so, you know, the idea that you need that other data is not about the transaction. It's not about the need of the actual individuals. It's about trying to add moral and ethical layers or political layers on top of the relationship to control it. And in essence, people have heard me talk before, it's the most basic form of censorship. If you try and change who I can deal with, how I can hold my money, and how I can make transactions, then what you're really doing is censoring my free will, because how I spend my money is the easiest and most, you know, visible example of the exercise of my free will.
All right, so I was just thinking about that. It's like the moral way that we interact with each other, we censor ourselves all the time. We're like, that guy is a jerk. I'm gonna mute him. I'm not gonna, you know, we have self-sovereign control over that censorship process, because I agree with you. It's a good framework to think about it. But it's also a concern in that, like, when an exchange gets hacked, as a moral person, do I want to take that Bitcoin that's, wow, 20% discount? That's amazing. I wonder why it's so cheap. Sure, I'll buy that token. Or do I want to have an ability to go, no, that's actually my brother's Bitcoin because he was on that exchange and he just got hacked and he got his money stolen. I don't want to buy that. I want that guy held accountable for trying to sell it to me, right? There is a moral component for how we interact with each other. And like we're saying, that this can go both ways.
A moral component but honestly, there's a moral component, but it's easily stripped away and not really part of your transaction, right? So the idea that, you know, that someone else can tell you that you can't take that, they're telling you, like the term hacking right there. I understand the social contract and the legal constructs which make the hack illegal, but in different societies and in different different establishments, it would be, you know, what's mine is mine, and what's yours is mine, and that's, you know, the law of the jungle. And so the guy, you know, and that possession becomes 9/10 of the law, which argumentally it already is. So, you know, I actually don't buy the argument that, you know, that I care about where it came from. At the end of the day, I think that once you go over that first toe over that line, that it just opens the Pandora's box of all the different things you need to consider. And so I think we need to reconsider all those terms and all those bases of morality. Like Mark Twain would say, there's no such thing as good and bad. There just is. Winnie the Pooh would say it also, by the way. But
yeah, so would Piglet.
Yeah.
No, the key thing I get a giggle out of, and this has been going on since they started arguing about this back in the late 70s, is that the idea of, I mean, in the 70s, it was impossible to do because barely anybody had credit cards and everything was done with cash and you just couldn't trace money. But the minute money tracing became possible, it became the default way that surveillance was done, that catching criminals was done, and they justified it because, well, you know, we're catching criminals with it. And really, it's not a good justification. And they, of course, have been helping along, they being the governments of the world, helping along the move to digitization of all monetary transactions so that they can literally control us, because they can watch every transaction we do and they can start saying, well, this kind of transaction is that. And because we're watching all transactions, we'll know when you do one. And as James says, that's fundamentally, that is almost the last straw for taking us from a reasonably free society to a dictatorship by committee, but a very small committee.
Guys, we're coming up on 2 hours. This one's flown by, especially because I didn't have to do much.
You had lots of coffee too.
Marco, you mentioned a couple times what's your business, and you dropped in there teams and all this other stuff. Like, what's your day job?
Well, I have several currently, but the one that's key. Yeah, aside from talking to you about law all day, I guess my primary gig is BlockBlocks, which it's on my LinkedIn profile, and it is a software development company that designs, starting with the philosophies, moving into the product, and then into the actual core, where we actually build blockchains. Most recent one being Anatha.io, which launched 4 weeks ago, and we're in the middle of doing a whole bunch of post-launch upgrades to the network to add more functionality that they've asked for. But it's basically, we took Cosmos Tendermint and ripped it apart, fixed it, not fixed in the sense of Cosmos Tendermint fixed, but fixed in the terms of made it do what their economic model needs, which was a significant departure from what standard proof of stake networks do. And we built that up and we've launched it. And we're now working with them very closely to continually evolve the program. And at the risk of probably breaking an NDA, but I don't think so, there are several CBDC projects that are looking at them as a foundational platform for launching a CBDC.
Very good. I like it.
Fun games.
Sandra, I just chatted you, but I'm just going to put you on the spot. Are you in a position to talk about your new gig? Just drop a couple lines in there, or is that next week thing?
No, that's going to be next week's thing. And I already got some questions for people that were on today's call, because I asked everybody, let's also connect on LinkedIn, because this is also a networking community. Some of you are asking, I see a new project, Europe Chain. What's that? It's going to be a teaser, maybe next week. Exciting project. But I don't want to disturb on everything that Marco and Luke and Alex brought into today's show, which I think was fantastic. And 2 hours flew by really fast. So maybe we
didn't have to do anything. This is great. I got coffee. I took care of my cats. I listened. I learned something new. This is cool.
So maybe a final note from your side. Looking forward to next week. Do we,
Yes. Next week we got a friend of mine, Jacob Stein. He's an asset protection attorney, which I think is a good follow-on to Marco being in the Caymans. He's very clever. He's very good. He approaches it from a U.S. perspective, but he's ex-Soviet Union. He's got a worldwide understanding. He helps people come into the U.S. when they have investments. People exit. All kinds of situations, whether it's tax planning, marriage planning, business planning. He's a sharp cookie. So I'm going to be deploying that. And actually, we have the guests for the next several weeks lined up. We got some backlog happening, which is good. Yeah, and then I guess that's it. Have a wonderful Wednesday, and maybe tomorrow we'll know who our president is for us Americans.
Yeah. Alex, Luke, thank you very much for getting in and bringing your insights.
Yeah, guys, great job. Marco, fantastic channel. Alex, would like to get to know you better. Luke, I feel like I know you well, but there's always more to learn. And I want to thank all our alumni speakers. I want to thank Tim Lewis and Jim and James and Alex. We got to get you in here, and just everyone. It was good. So, Sandra, shall we wrap it up?
Yeah, maybe as a final note for everyone that's not attending our Telegram channel yet, please go to Telegram, look for Crypto Wednesdays, join our channel, share the Zoom link for next week, and we look forward to having this same group, the same community, at the same time, same Zoom link next week again. So thank you all for participating. We really appreciate that. And we wish you all a good week and stay healthy, guys.
Thanks. Excellent panel.
Hey, guys.
Ciao, Marco. Bye.
Yo.